You know, it sounds absolutely crazy, but today we're diving into a story where a literally brainless marine animal is going toe-to-toe with multi-billion-dollar human infrastructure. Welcome to today's Explainer. We're looking at a huge, and I mean huge, clash between the natural world and modern engineering. We're talking massive jellyfish blooms and the cutting-edge bioacoustics research that's trying to politely ask them to leave. Right off the bat, ask yourself, how on earth does an animal with zero brain cells force a nuclear reactor to shut down? I mean, it sounds like the setup to a sci-fi B-movie, doesn't it? But this is the bizarre reality we're tackling today. We usually just think of jellyfish as a beach day nuisance, maybe a painful sting if you're unlucky. But honestly, that's barely scratching the surface. Dense swarms of these things are literally crippling our most vital coastal power and water facilities. A swarm can arrive totally out of nowhere, and because they're essentially just drifting on the currents, they get sucked right into the massive intake pipes that keep these plants running. And the global scale of this is just wild. To put this in perspective, back in 2011, a swarm forced a cooling water restriction at the Shimane nuclear plant in Japan. Fast forward to 2013, over in Sweden, Oskarshamn nuclear plant had a major reactor stop because of them. Then in Israel, 2019, a desalination plant was completely clogged, shutting down the water supply for hours. The sheer biomass, just the physical weight and volume of a dense swarm, can choke these massive industrial screens in no time flat. And look, for a water-stressed country relying on desalination, a shutdown isn't just an inconvenience. It is a direct hit to national water and energy security.
Because the stakes are so high, researchers actually mapped out what they call Tier A problem coastlines. Basically, these are hotspots where reoccurring jellyfish blooms pose an existential threat to local economies and infrastructure. You've got Israel's Mediterranean coast, heavily reliant on desalinated water. Northern Australia, where the deadly box jellyfish essentially shuts down thousands of kilometers of beaches for half the year. They literally call it stinger season. Then there's the Sea of Japan dealing with those nuclear incidents, and the Gulf of Thailand, where these massive swarms wreck both tourism and industrial cooling.
So, how do we handle this right now? Well, it's pretty much entirely brute force. We're talking mechanical shredders, huge physical nets that cost a fortune to maintain, or these super energy-intensive bubble curtains. And honestly, a lot of the time, they just end up killing the animals, or workers have to physically net them out by hand. But there's this group, the Herd Project. They're a research lab focused on low-frequency acoustics, and they're asking a totally different, fascinating question. Instead of shredding them, what if we could use a low-frequency acoustic barrier to politely ask the jellyfish to swim away? But hold on, that brings up a massive biological puzzle. How do you speak to an animal that doesn't have a brain? It doesn't have a central nervous system like we do, and it definitely 100% does not have ears. If we want to politely ask a swarm to change a course, we first have to figure out how these weird gelatinous creatures actually perceive the world around them. Okay, here's the secret. Jellyfish actually have these incredible little sensory organs called statocysts. Picture them sitting right around the rim of the jellyfish's bell. Inside these tiny little balance organs, there are actual mineral grains and highly sensitive hair cells. So when the jellyfish tilts or when the water current bumps them, those little mineral grains press against the hairs. Scientists literally describe it as an ear without a brain. And the kicker? Those delicate hair cells don't just feel physical tilts, they are highly sensitive to very low-frequency sounds. Which brings us to the actual science making this whole acoustic deterrent idea possible. There was this landmark study in 2016 by Soleil and a team of researchers published in Scientific Reports. This paper is really the foundational bedrock of today's explainer. They prove that when Mediterranean jellyfish were exposed to low-frequency sound, they actually developed physical damage to their hair cells in their statocysts. Now, this is a bit of a double-edged sword. On one hand, it's absolute, undeniable proof that jellyfish hear or feel low-frequency sound, but it's also a strict warning. Blast them with a sound that's too strong or too loud, and you'll physically maim them. Now, using sound to steer marine life isn't entirely new. There's actually a really strong precedent for it. Acoustic fences are already a proven working technology for keeping fish away from intake pipes. We know that broadcasting sound in the 20 to 600 hertz range cuts fish intake by an average of 60%. And specific infrasound setups, they've dropped intake of cyprinid fish by up to 80%. That is huge. But when it comes to jellyfish, we are in totally uncharted waters. Acoustic barriers for them are still considered completely preliminary. So we're taking a proven concept for fish and pushing it right to the bleeding edge of R&D for jellyfish. And look, because we are right on that bleeding edge, we really need to separate hard science from folklore. The proven anatomical fact is that jellyfish have low-frequency hearing via those statocysts. That is well documented. But you might have heard old sailors' tales claiming jellyfish use this hearing to reliably predict approaching storms and swim away to safety. Well, rigorous scientific reviews have looked into that. And yeah, it's just an unproven legend. So, to be super clear, the research we're talking about relies entirely on the proven biology of the statocyst, not old myths about weather forecasting. Part 2. The Herd Project, engineering a polite acoustic barrier. So how do they actually build this thing? To engineer a truly polite barrier, one that shifts the swarm's direction without causing any acoustic injury to those tiny hair cells, the Herd Project has mapped out a really rigorous 4-phase plan. They aren't just chucking giant speakers into the ocean. Phase 1 is on the bench, carefully calibrating an underwater low-frequency emitter right there in a controlled tank. Phase 2 is behavior. They run frequency sweeps at very low volumes and use video tracking to see, hey, do the jellyfish actually move away from this? Phase 3 is the absolute deal breaker, safety. They'll use electron microscopes to inspect the statocysts and verify zero damage is happening. If it's not safe, there's no product, period. And finally, Phase 4 takes it to the field to test a pilot system out in a real bay or water intake. The team is treating this as honest, ground-up research. They've got a working hypothesis and some really specific questions to answer. First, exactly which frequencies, probably somewhere in the single to tens of hertz, make the jellyfish actively avoid the area, rather than just ignoring it? Second, where exactly is that injury threshold, and how do we ensure our polite sound stays safely below it? They also have to figure out if different species react differently. Does a deadly Australian box jellyfish respond the same way as a common Mediterranean barrel jelly? And maybe the most important question, do they habituate? Like, will the swarm just get used to the noise after a few hours, meaning we have to constantly change the signal? If this low-frequency tech actually works and they answer those questions, the impact is going to be staggering. We're looking at a commercial horizon that is way, way bigger than just keeping the water clear for tourists in Phuket. We're talking about a fundamental shift in how human infrastructure interacts with the ocean. Think about the regions getting hammered by these swarms. A humane acoustic deterrent opens up almost unlimited commercial and safety potential. Up in northern Australia, the deadly Irukandji jellyfish essentially lock down thousands of kilometers of coastline for half the year. If you eliminate that stinger season, you are reclaiming months of economic downtime and turning it into year-round resort revenue. It means yacht captains can confidently let guests swim in wild tropical bays without worrying. And crucially, it creates a non-lethal, highly effective, invisible shield for the water intakes of power plants and desalination facilities all over the globe, from the Mediterranean to the Sea of Japan. Which leaves us with this really incredible, provocative thought to wrap up the explainer today. We spend so much time and money trying to conquer nature with sheer brute force. Nets, shredders, massive physical walls. But what happens when we just take a step back and try to understand the delicate, microscopic biology of a completely brainless animal? By simply learning how to speak politely to nature using low-frequency sound, we might just solve one of the most surprising and costly threats to global coastal infrastructure. Thanks for tuning in, and I really hope this deep dive has completely flipped how you view both jellyfish and the amazing potential of bioacoustics.